My friends, have you ever felt abandoned? Have you ever sat in the quiet of your own soul, wondering why God seems to have drawn you away from the familiar, from the warmth of community, from the noise of life itself? It is a peculiar thing, this isolation. It unsettles us, it whispers doubts into our ears. It makes us feel as though we are forgotten. But I urge you, do not despair, for what if I told you that the very isolation you fear is in fact an act of divine mercy, that when God draws you away, it is not to abandon you, but to prepare you. When He removes the noise, it is not because He is absent, but because He is about to speak. When God isolates you, it often feels like rejection, like something has gone wrong. You look around and wonder why certain friendships have faded, why opportunities seem to slip through your fingers, why the places where you once found comfort no longer feel the same. The natural instinct is to assume you have failed in some way, that you have been set aside because you are unworthy, unfit, or forgotten. But what if the very thing that feels like a loss is actually a gift? What if your isolation is not punishment but preparation? Throughout history, God has drawn people away, setting them apart from the crowd, not to harm them, but to refine them. He does not isolate to break. He isolates to build. Before great assignments, before moments of destiny, before the unveiling of something extraordinary, there is often a season of solitude, and this solitude is not an empty void. It is a sacred space where transformation happens. Consider the story of Joseph. He was given a dream, a glimpse of his future. But before he could step into that calling, he was thrown into a pit, sold into slavery, falsely accused and imprisoned. From the outside, it appeared as though God had abandoned him, as though his life had taken a tragic turn. But in truth, God was preparing him. Had Joseph not spent those years in isolation, learning wisdom, humility, and resilience, he would not have been ready to govern Egypt and save countless lives. His isolation was not rejection, it was preparation. Moses too experienced this pattern. Raised as a prince in Pharaoh's house, he was destined for greatness. But before he could lead the Israelites out of Egypt, he spent 40 years in the wilderness tending sheep. From a palace to the silence of the desert. It must have felt like a fall from grace. Yet, in that solitude, God was shaping him, teaching him patience, stripping away his pride, and preparing him for the immense responsibility ahead. The burning bush did not appear to Moses in Pharaoh's court. It appeared in the wilderness, in the very place where he thought his life had been reduced to nothing. And then there is Jesus. Before his ministry began, he was led by the Spirit into the wilderness. For 40 days he was alone, fasting, praying, facing temptation. He was isolated but not abandoned. He was being prepared, not punished. And when he emerged, he walked in power, in clarity, in purpose. The isolation had not weakened him, it had strengthened him. This is the pattern of God. When he has something great in store, he first takes you through a season of separation. He removes distractions. He strips away crutches. He brings you to a place where you have nothing to rely on but him. And though it feels painful, it is necessary, because without this time of preparation, you would not be ready for what comes next. The problem is, we often resist this process. We see isolation as a setback instead of a setup. We focus on what we have lost instead of what we are gaining. We cling to what is familiar, not realizing that God is calling us to something greater. But if we could see the bigger picture, we would not fear these seasons of solitude. We would embrace them. Because the very thing that feels like a delay is in fact divine preparation. So if you find yourself in a season where doors have closed, where people have walked away, where you feel hidden and unseen, do not despair. God is not punishing you. He is preparing you. He is refining your character, strengthening your faith, and aligning your heart with His purpose. And when the time is right, when the work in you is complete, He will bring you out, not as the same person who entered, but as someone ready for the calling ahead. Silence unsettles us. We are creatures of noise, drawn to the constant hum of conversations, the steady rhythm of daily routines, the reassurance of familiar voices. When the noise fades and we are left alone in the quiet, it can feel unnatural, even frightening. We mistake the silence for God's absence, believing that if we cannot hear Him, He must not be there. But what if the silence is not abandonment, but an invitation? What if God does His greatest work not in the noise, but in the stillness? Throughout Scripture, God speaks in unexpected ways. Elijah, weary and discouraged, stood on a mountain waiting for the Lord to reveal Himself. A mighty wind came, but God was not in the wind. An earthquake shook the ground, but God was not in the earthquake. A fire raged, but still God was not in the fire. And then, after all the noise had passed, there came a gentle whisper. It was in the whisper, in the quiet, that Elijah encountered God. The same is true for us. We expect God to speak through grand gestures, through obvious signs, through the loud and the dramatic, but often He speaks in the stillness. And if we are too distracted, too restless, too uncomfortable with silence, we will miss Him. The wilderness is a place where God strips away the unnecessary. It is in these seasons of isolation that He removes distractions so that we can hear Him more clearly. When we are surrounded by people, by plans, by constant motion, it is easy to let His voice become one among many. But when God pulls us away, when He allows us to walk through seasons of solitude, He is not being cruel. He is drawing us closer. He is making room for revelation. Consider Jesus, who often withdrew to solitary places to pray. Even the Son of God needed moments of stillness to commune with the Father. Before major moments in His ministry, He retreated to the mountains, to the wilderness, to places where He could be alone. If Jesus Himself needed quiet to align with the will of God, how much more do we? The noise of life can drown out the voice of God, but in the silence we learn to listen. The silence also teaches us dependence. When we feel isolated, when the familiar voices fade, we are left with only one voice to cling to, His. And in that process we begin to understand that He is enough, that His presence alone sustains us, that even when no one else sees, when no one else understands, He is there. There is an intimacy that can only be found in solitude, a deepening of faith that cannot be forged in the noise. This season may feel empty, but it is not wasted. God is not distant. He is not silent in the way we understand silence. He is working beneath the surface, reshaping our hearts, strengthening our spirits, deepening our trust. The absence of noise is not the absence of His presence. If anything, it is the evidence of His closeness. So do not fear the silence. Do not mistake solitude for abandonment. Do not assume that just because God is quiet, He is not at work. He is drawing you into a deeper place, a place where His voice is not lost in the chaos, where His presence is not competing for attention. And when the time comes, when His work in you is complete, you will step out of this season not with the same restless heart, but with one that has learned to listen, to trust, and to be still in the presence of the One who never truly leaves. Throughout Scripture we see a profound pattern. Before God entrusts someone with a great calling, He first draws them into a season of isolation. This is not a punishment, nor is it a sign of His absence. It is, instead, a divine strategy, a sacred preparation that strengthens and refines the soul. If we look closely, we will find that some of the most powerful figures in the Bible were shaped not in the midst of crowds, but in the solitude of the wilderness, in the silence of exile, in the quiet of hidden places. Moses was raised in the palace of Pharaoh, surrounded by wealth, power, and influence. Yet before he could step into his destiny as the deliverer of Israel, he was sent into the wilderness. For 40 years he lived in obscurity, tending sheep in a foreign land. To the world it may have seemed like his life had been reduced to nothing, that his potential had been wasted. But in reality God was preparing him. He was teaching him humility, patience, and leadership, qualities he would need to lead an entire nation through the desert. When the time came for him to stand before Pharaoh, he was no longer the impulsive prince who had once acted in anger. He was a man who had learned to listen to God, to trust his voice, and to walk in obedience. His time of isolation was not a setback. It was a necessary process. Elijah, too, was no stranger to isolation. After confronting the prophets of Baal in a dramatic showdown on Mount Carmel, he found himself fleeing for his life, alone and weary. He cried out to God, feeling abandoned and defeated. But it was in that isolation that God met him, not in the wind, not in the fire, not in the earthquake, but in a gentle whisper. It was in that solitude that Elijah was strengthened, given fresh instructions, and sent back with renewed purpose. Had he not been drawn away, he may never have heard the still, small voice that changed everything. And then there is David. Anointed as king while still a shepherd boy, he did not immediately ascend to the throne. Instead, he spent years on the run, hiding in caves, isolated from the life he once knew. Those years of solitude were filled with hardship, yet they were also the years that shaped him into the man after God's own heart. In the quiet of the wilderness, he learned to worship. In the loneliness of exile, he wrote psalms that still speak to the hearts of believers today. His time in isolation was not wasted. It was the very thing that prepared him for kingship. Even Jesus, the Son of God, experienced this pattern. Before beginning his public ministry, he was led by the Spirit into the wilderness for 40 days. There he fasted, prayed, and was tempted. It was a time of testing, of refining, of preparation. Only after emerging from that season did he step into his divine mission, healing the ain at, "Oh, occurred. Please check your connection and try again. If this issue persists, please contact us through our help center at help@openai.com. When God isolates you, it is not a sign of his rejection, but a mark of his trust. He does not place heavy burdens on those he does not intend to strengthen, nor does he lead into solitude those he does not wish to transform. The trials you face, the loneliness you endure, the stripping away of what once brought you comfort, these are not random occurrences. They are deliberate, intentional, and deeply meaningful. God trusts you enough to refine you, to mold you, to take you through a process that will not only change your circumstances, but will change you. We often view trials as tragedies, moments of suffering meant to break us down. But in God's hands, trials are tools, chisels that carve away what is unnecessary, purifying us for the work he has set before us. The fire you walk through is not there to consume you, but to refine you. The waiting you endure is not meaningless delay, but divine preparation. The isolation you feel is not abandonment, but a sacred season where God is shaping you into something greater. Look at Job, a man who was righteous yet stripped of everything, his wealth, his family, his health. His suffering was immense, his loneliness profound. Yet in his isolation he encountered God in a way that few ever do. When everything else was taken, Job was left with only God, and that was enough. His trial was not the end of his story. It was the foundation for his greatest blessing. God restored him, but not before proving his faith, deepening his wisdom, and revealing his sovereignty. Job's suffering was not in vain. It was a trust, a divine invitation to know God more deeply. Paul too understood this principle. Before becoming one of the greatest apostles, he spent years in solitude, learning, growing, unlearning the ways of his past. His trials, the imprisonments, the beatings, the shipwrecks, were not signs that God had abandoned him, but proof that God was using him. He wrote some of his most powerful letters from a prison cell, isolated yet deeply connected to the Spirit of God. The chains that bound him did not limit his purpose, they amplified it. His suffering was not a tragedy, it was a trust. And then, of course, there is Jesus. No one was more trusted with suffering than the Son of God. He was despised, rejected, abandoned by those closest to him. In his final moments, even the crowds that had once followed him turned away, and yet, in that isolation, in the agony of the cross, God's greatest work was accomplished. Salvation was won not in the presence of a cheering crowd, but in the darkness of seeming defeat. His suffering was not a mistake, it was the very reason he had come. If God has allowed you to walk through loneliness, through trials, through seasons where you feel forgotten, do not despair. You have been trusted with something sacred. He is refining you, stretching you, preparing you for a purpose you may not yet see. The weight you bear is not a sign of his distance, but of his nearness. He is shaping you into someone who can carry the responsibility, the wisdom, and the strength required for the next chapter of your life. Do not see your trial as a tragedy. See it as a trust. Do not mistake your isolation for abandonment. It is in these quiet, painful, refining moments that God does his most profound work. And when the season shifts, when he brings you into the fulfillment of what he has prepared for you, you will understand. You were never forgotten. You were being prepared all along. Despair has a way of whispering that the story is over. When you find yourself isolated, when prayers seem unanswered, when doors remain shut, it is easy to believe that nothing will change. The enemy thrives in these moments, feeding the lie that this season is permanent, that you have been forgotten, that your pain has no purpose. But the enemy does not write your story. God does. And God is not finished yet. Throughout history, God has allowed his people to walk through seasons that seem hopeless, only to reveal that he was working all along. Joseph, after years of slavery and imprisonment, must have wondered if his dream would ever come to pass. Every passing year in that prison cell must have felt like another nail in the coffin of his purpose. But God had not forgotten him. The very chains that held him back were the same ones that positioned him for greatness. In a single moment, everything changed. One day he was a prisoner. The next he was standing before Pharaoh, stepping into the destiny God had promised him. The same was true for Job. His suffering was immense, his loss unbearable. He sat in the ashes of what once was, believing that his best days were behind him. But Job's story did not end in despair. God restored him, not just with what he had lost, but with more than he could have imagined. The season of suffering had a purpose, and when it ended, Job saw the faithfulness of God in ways he never had before. David, too, knew what it was like to feel forgotten. Anointed as king, yet forced into hiding, living in caves, pursued by enemies, he must have questioned whether God's promise would ever come to pass. But even in the darkness of isolation, God was preparing him. When the seasons shifted, when the time was right, David stepped into his kingship, not as the same boy who had been anointed, but as a man who had been tested, refined, and made ready for the throne. And then there is Jesus. If ever a moment seemed final, it was the cross. The silence of the tomb must have felt unbearable to those who had placed their hope in him. The world believed it was over. But 3 days later, the stone was rolled away, and what seemed like the end was revealed to be the greatest victory in history. Your story is not over. The silence does not mean God has abandoned you. The waiting does not mean He has forgotten you. Isolation is not the final chapter. It is only part of the journey. God is still writing, still working, still preparing you for something beyond what you can see. Hold on. Do not let despair convince you that this season is forever. Do not allow the enemy to tell you that you are alone, just as he did with Joseph, with Job, with David, and with Jesus. God is setting the stage for something greater. The breakthrough, the restoration, the fulfillment of His promises, it is coming. And when it arrives, you will see that He was never late, never absent, never unaware of your pain. He was working all along. So do not despair. The story isn't over yet. The best is still ahead. When God isolates you, when He takes you through seasons of solitude and waiting, it is not because He is done with you. It is because He is preparing to reveal something greater. In these moments, it is easy to feel forgotten, as if life is passing you by while others are thriving. You may wonder why your prayers seem unanswered, why the opportunities that once seemed promising have disappeared, why people you trusted have walked away. But what if this isolation is not a delay, but a setup? What if God is not holding you back, but positioning you for something beyond what you could ask or imagine? God is strategic. He does not waste anything, not your pain, not your waiting, not even your loneliness. Every moment of isolation is intentional, a time of preparation before a great unveiling. Consider the way a seed grows. When it is planted, it is buried in darkness, hidden beneath the soil. From the outside, it looks as though nothing is happening. It seems buried, forgotten, but in reality, something incredible is taking place beneath the surface. The seed is breaking, roots are forming, and the foundation for new life is being established. The darkness is not the end, it is the beginning. When the time is right, that seed pushes through the soil, revealing the growth that had been taking place all along. Your isolation is not burial, it is planting. God is doing something in the unseen places, beneath the surface, where no one else can see. He is growing you in ways that will become evident in time. But just as a seed cannot be rushed, neither can God's process. If you pull a plant from the ground too soon, it will not survive because its roots are not ready. In the same way, if God were to release you into your calling before you were prepared, it could destroy you instead of bless you. That is why He keeps you hidden for a season, not to harm you, but to strengthen you. Look at Jesus. For 30 years He lived in relative obscurity, working as a carpenter, walking among people who had no idea who He truly was. Then, after His baptism, He did not immediately step into His ministry. Instead, He was led by the Spirit into the wilderness for 40 days. He fasted, He prayed, He was tested. That time of isolation was necessary because it prepared Him for what was ahead. When He emerged, He walked in power, teaching with authority, healing the sick and fulfilling His purpose. Had He skipped that season of solitude, He would not have been fully prepared for the weight of His calling. In the same way, God is preparing you. The waiting may be difficult, the loneliness may feel overwhelming, but there is purpose in it. The friendships that ended, the opportunities that closed, the paths that seemed to disappear, none of it was by accident. God is protecting you from things you cannot yet see. He is removing what could hinder you and making room for what will sustain you. The doors that have closed are not rejections, they are redirections. The people who left were not meant to stay for where God is taking you. When the time comes, when you have been refined, when your faith has been strengthened, when your character has been shaped, God will reveal what He has been working on all along. And when He does, it will be greater than anything you could have imagined. The season of isolation will make sense. The pain will not have been wasted. What once felt like a loss will be seen as a divine setup. So do not despise this season. Do not mistake God's silence for His absence. You are being prepared, positioned, and planted for something greater. When the unveiling happens, you will see it was worth the wait.